Hello and welcome back, everyone. We are continuing on our journey as we create a whole bunch of Christmas holiday cards in watercolor, and I'll be using a combination of stamping and watercolor painting. But today we are going to focus on wreaths. As you can see here, I have a couple different samples and we're going to make even a couple different more. So I think the biggest thing when trying to tackle watercolor cards or handmade cards is coming up with lots of variations of ideas and really finding and settling on the one that works best for you. So in this video, I am going to be showing you a couple different versions of wreaths, and then there'll be a part 2 where I show you a couple different more. And that's just one kind of way, one composition in terms of a wreath, a round circular iconic image from holiday, the holiday times that we are going to be tackling, and just in so many different ways. As you can see, the sample here of 4 different ways to do it alone. And again, we're going to do 2 other ones in this video, so hang on tight, and then we're going to do 2 more, so make sure to look for and watch the follow-up video where we do 2 additional ones. So let's get started and laying out some of our supplies. So while I get set up here, don't forget to like and follow, subscribe to this channel, like this video. Feel free to leave a comment if you have questions or want to shout out something that I do here. Please feel free to leave a comment. I always enjoy reading your comments. And definitely check out the description of this video with links to all supplies and materials. And let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is, for demonstration purposes, I am just going to be painting here on a piece of 9x12 paper. This is a Fabriano tablet. It's a tablet of 25% cotton student grade paper. So I'm just going to make 4 sections which are going to mimic the cover of what a card would look like, the size and dimensions of a card. So you can see here are some other samples of ones that I've already done. These were part of the Studio Crew classroom. So if you're interested in even more ideas and step-by-step instruction, you can go join the Studio Crew classroom and get even additional ideas and instruction for more holiday card making. So we are using wreaths today. So you're going to be grabbing yourself something round, or we're doing wreaths today. We're not using them. So get yourself something round. I'm going to zoom in here. And I always use my handy dandy tape roll usually when I'm looking for something round, and it's the perfect size. And you have both the interior and the exterior of the tape roll to give you 2 different size circles. But I'm just going to draw 4 different guideline circles. So these are guidelines. I am going to leave them dark as I paint on them, just for the purposes of demonstration, so you can see kind of what I'm doing. But you can certainly erase yours and make them a little lighter. You can see here I'm using my favorite brush, my Silver Black Velvet. This is the size 8 one that I've been using a lot, especially on this size for cards. A little bit smaller. It has a great tip and a great size for this. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a look in my palette and see what wells I can already use. So I've been doing a lot of the same or similar colors. So that first green, that really dark green up there, that's just a combination of sap green and phthalo blue. This second one here was just some leftover, and it's going to be some sap green, and I think there was some burnt sienna in there, but now I'm going to add some more yellow back to it just to make this lighter green color. So for our first wreath, you just need 2 different green colors, one more yellow, one more dark bluish green, in order to make 2 different colors of broad shaped leaves. So that's what we're going to start with. Our first wreath is going to have wider, broader shaped leaves and then some berry accents. And this is a great beginner wreath. Absolutely wonderful because it's just repeating the same shape over and over again, but in slightly different colors, which is what gives it variety. And then the berries, the red berries, are going to add that pop of color. So your wreaths do not have to be complicated in order to be effective. They really just you need to think about color, elements, your pops of color, your color values and your composition, and just make one or two simple choices in those areas, and you will have endless variation of different wreaths and different options for holiday cards in general. So let's first start. I'm going to start down here on this bottom area, and I'm going to make a broad shaped leaf. So I'm going to do basically a tiny little stem, and I'm going to turn my paper as I go, and I'm going to do a little stem and press down to make the full size shaped leaf. Now this paper isn't my favorite. It's fine for demonstration purposes. Most of my cards I will make on arch watercolor paper or arches, believe it or not. These are fine. This is fine, and it works out well in the end. You do get a little pooling. The paper doesn't absorb the water as nicely as 100% cotton. It's only 25% cotton, but that's okay. It's a beautiful watercolor effect, and if you play into it, it will work out really well for you. So I'm just going to find my way all the way around my wreath here, and adding in. So the thing with wreaths, as you add around, you don't have to add in and fill up every single space with the very first element you put on. You do want to start with your biggest element, so the thing that is generally the largest, that's going to take up the most space. You would start with that and kind of fill in the space and set the base or the foundation, as you then add smaller and smaller filler elements on top of that. So I'm starting with my leaves here, the biggest element, and I'm going to do these same types of leaves but in a different color as well, and I'm going to fill in more space. This is going to be a very full, very fluffy wreath. I would say for you to let your wreath, your first layer, dry completely before adding the second layer. I'm moving a little quickly for the sake of the camera magic here. I could have paused it certainly and let it dry and then cut back to another one, but I'm just going to go for it and find the dry spots and try to paint over those. But feel free to let yours sit for a few minutes between layers to add some drying time. So as you can see here, I'm kind of going through, and what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at where the gaps are, and I'm starting to fill in some of those gaps. And again, I know I have my berry elements still, but those are very tiny. So I do want to fill in the majority of this with my second element on this particular wreath. And I'll show you on some subsequent wreaths, some additional ones, how we will be, not filling everything in with the very first shape or element. So I'm going to use my heat tool. I was getting very impatient, and some of my leaves were getting pretty sloppy, especially on the right-hand side there. You can see that. You know what? We're going to not panic, and we're going to bring that back and revive it with some additional brush strokes after we let it dry. So it's okay if you get to the stage and things are looking a little messy. No worries at all. You can go back in with some additional layers to clean things up. And you can see there, just by letting that dry completely, or forcing it to dry completely, and adding on some additional layers, I am cleaning up the edges and making it just look a little bit neater and tidier. One of the things that it's harder to do on camera, or I don't want to do it as much, especially when working on a sheet, is turning my paper, because I want you to be able to see kind of exactly what I'm doing from the same vantage point each time. But turning your paper for you at home is absolutely crucial, and a lot of people, they feel like they forget that part while they're working. But definitely turn your paper. It makes it easier, because you do want all your leaves kind of heading in the same direction, at least when you're making a full complete wreath. If they were kind of heading in opposite directions, it would look a little messier, and that's easier to do when you can turn your brush. So we've cleaned up some of our leaves. We're going to now add in some berries. Berries are super simple. just little round, there's all different kinds of berries, and you can get more complicated and more detailed with them, especially if you're making bigger ones. But the little ones that are acting as filler, just little red circles, round shapes. I usually leave a little white highlight empty. I just don't paint the whole thing. I'll leave a little white highlight there. And then even dropping in a little additional color while it's still wet on like one edge or the other to make that other edge slightly darker gives them a little shape and dimension. But you don't have to overthink these, especially when you're doing something relatively small or tiny, like the face of a card. Of course, if you're painting a much larger painting, you might want to be a little bit more detailed. But these are simple and easy. You can get carried away with berries. I absolutely often get carried away with the berries as you put them in and add those pops of color, especially when you're trying to create a balanced piece. And you want it to be, feel kind of the same weight on each side in terms of all the elements. That doesn't mean you need it to be exactly the same, like 2 berries on this side and 2 berries directly across from it. But you do want it to feel balanced. And as you're doing that, kind of like, what could I equate this to? Like, if you've ever cut your own bangs. Has anybody out there ever cut their own bangs? Like, you cut them and they're just slightly off, so you continue to try to even them out. And then before you know it, you have like no bangs left. That can be what berries will be for you. So berries, you could just keep adding them and just one more here to balance it out or to make it feel more even. And before you know it, your whole piece is covered in berries. So be careful, beware of the berries in our holiday card making. They're going to appear often and in different ways. Sometimes they'll be ovals, sometimes they'll be round and circular, sometimes they'll be bigger and in big bunches. Whatever it is, just be thoughtful and mindful before you start the berries. All right, so I have just put in all the berries. I've connected them to the leaves with just tiny little stems there. The color I used for my berries was just some alizarin crimson. And I'm going back in now and just adding in 1 or 2 darker leaves in areas that I felt could use a little bit more. And you can see I am starting to turn the page. It is awkward trying to keep my hand out of the frame so you can see what I'm doing, but also be able to paint correctly. It's challenging for sure, but I will do my best to keep you in the know of what is going on under my hand there. See, I'm adding in more berries again. Don't do it. All right, I think I'm going to rein myself in here, and we are just about finished with this first wreath. So we're going to be moving on to the second one. We will be putting in sentiments, stamped sentiments on this, and you can see the link for the different stamps that I use in the description of this video, but that will happen at the very end of the 2 videos. So I cut this into 2 separate shorter videos, Wreath 1 and Wreath 2. So make sure to check out that second video to get the second 2 wreaths of this process. So right now we're going to move on to wreath number 2, and we're going to use a lot of the same or similar colors, but I'm going to use a smaller brush. So you can see there I'm going to use a liner brush and make a lot smaller elements that are going to come together and also make a lovely wreath. So with my liner brush, and I've picked up some burnt umber, I am going to start lining in a bunch of branches around that circle. And you can see I don't stay right on the circle, but I stay kind of close to it in the beginning. And I'm just taking branches, leading them off one over the other, just using that liner brush, keeping them really nice and thin. And again, this is another hard brush and process when I'm keeping it straight on and not turning my page. I would definitely turn my page on this one as I make these different branches or elements. So you can see, take your time so that way you feel like it's balanced. You're not like rushing through it necessarily, but also not overthinking it as well. Just kind of finding your way around the circle. You saw there I skipped sides too. You don't have to go one after the other, after the other, after the other. You can do a little bit on the right side, a little bit on the left side until they kind of all come together. So I've set our foundation with the branches, and now I'm going to put in some other small elements. I'm using, again, sap green and then a little phthalo blue for that darker green color. And I'm going to put in and adding a little bit more phthalo blue to make it a little bit bluer rather than green. So the first element I'm going to put in are these kind of pine sprigs. So it's just one thin line down the middle and then tiny little jutting lines, sharp lines just off of them. I'm flicking my brush one side and the other. You can also make sprigs with a liner brush, and I'll show you that here. So the other one I used was with my size 8 silver black velvet. And that worked beautifully because I have a very good tip on that. If you don't have a really fine point tip on your brush, but you have a liner, go ahead and use your liner to do this because you do want these to be nice, fine little sprigs. So I'll do the rest of these with my liner brush, but you can do them with a nice tipped size, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on how good of a brush that you have. So the sprigs I am spacing out here. I'm trying to, again, create balance on the wreath. When you have especially when you have a circle, balance is going to be important unless it is forced, like a forced off balance thing. And you'll see that in the last wreath we do in video number 2. So don't forget to check that one out because we will be purposefully unbalancing our wreath for a particular effect. But this one, you try to keep things generally, in a balanced way. So here you can see I don't have identical. I have 2, and then I've done it kind of in thirds, and I'm adding a few more. And now I'm going to add some smaller green leaves here throughout. But I'm not going to get carried away with the leaves. I'm not going to do really big ones like the first one. They're going to be small, and they're going to be somewhat sparse. Just a few additional little leaves here and there. All right, now that I've put in a few regular leaves, I'm going to add some eucalyptus. So you can see here I'm using, it's a combination of phthalo blue, Payne's gray with a little sap green. So it's a very blue, blue, like a greenish blue. And eucalyptus is super easy in these small elements. It's just a line down the center, and then off of it you're going to have little blobs of eucalyptus leaves. I do go over this in more detail when I talk about all the different elements you can incorporate in the Studio Crew classroom. In the Studio Crew classroom, which you can find in the description. I break down each element and how to paint each element that we're going over here. So the pine sprigs, the eucalyptus, different shaped leaves and different stems, different berries, so on and so forth. But here you can see I'm just dotting in these eucalyptus leaves. And again, I'm kind of sticking with the rule of 3s here right now, putting 3, 3, 3 in terms of the sprigs and the eucalyptus, but I might break that as I work my way along, but it does help to create kind of this natural kind of balancing act. So I want to fill this wreath out a little bit more, but I don't want to add like other new elements. So I'm going to add a few more of the kind of slightly broader shaped leaf shapes here on these long branches. So you can see I added a few there, and I'm doing them in a slightly darker, more bluish color. And that just kind of sticking with the color theme. The eucalyptus already carries over that color, so I'm just creating really a different shape with that same color. We'll just add in a few more kind of on each side. and just filling out our wreath a little bit more. So it's great to kind of put an element in and then take a step back from your wreath and decide, is this full enough? Do I want it to be very sparse? Do I want it to be fluffier? I really like this one because you can clearly see kind of crisply all these tiny little elements that come together to create the wreath shape. And then again with our berries, these are going to be really tiny. So I'm doing these with my rigger brush so that I can create really tiny little berry shapes. Oh, and then I also have like this really mini size one. Let's use that because I'm making super tiny little berries. I'm not even going to worry about keeping the white spots on them, but really tiny little, almost pinprick size berries. But they will pop really well because of that contrasting color. You can see I just put my hand, whoops, in the first berries I put down, and they were still wet. It happens. I'm going to let them dry, paint it back over them, let them dry and define their edges a little bit more. No big deal. At least I noticed before I put my hand down again in the middle of the card with the wet paint on it. But let's zoom in a little bit here and you can see how teeny tiny these berries are. No real definition or detail, just little red pinpricks with the little dots of color. And that's all you really need. The last element to this will just be connecting those berries down to the branches below, so that way they're just not floating red dots out in space. And while I do that, I'm going to also add in a few kind of loose branches just jutting out into space a little bit that don't necessarily have a berry connected to them, but they're just little twigs. And that concludes our second wreath. So thank you for joining me for these first two. Don't forget to check out video 2. Very exciting for all the different ideas that hopefully I can inspire in you to have lots of different choices when you're sitting down to make your lovely handmade cards for friends and family members. Thank you again. I'm Shayna Cersei. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel and check out the description for links to all the supplies as well as links to my Studio Crew classroom where you can get even more information, tutorials, traceables, and lots of ideas for this upcoming holiday season. Thanks so much, everybody. Happy painting.